Hi, everybody. Okay, let's talk about the astrology of April. So, April starts with a first quarter square between the sun and the moon. Okay, we have the sun at 13 degrees of Aries and the moon at 13 degrees of Cancer. First quarter squares is the first sort of crisis point that begins just after. It's the first sort of crisis point that we come to um, after the new moon, right? And we have to remember that the new moon was in Aries. That occurred on the 24th of March. And the new moon was conjunct Chiron, the wounded healer, and it was square the nodes of the moon. And so, right from the get go on that new moon, and of course, the new moon in Aries is always a very powerful new moon because Aries is the start of the zodiacal year. And we've spent an awful lot of time with energy in Pisces. Okay. We had a Mercury retrograde in Pisces. Neptune is in Pisces. And of course, the sun was in Pisces for 30 days. And so we started to come out of that sort of great cosmic sea, that sort of place of oneness to express ourselves, to become, right? New beginnings, new birth. And the new moon sort of increases that energy, and this is when we really start things with the new moon in Aries. And this new moon was conjunct Chiron, the wound, okay? The wound of identity, the wound of being separate from spirit, really, okay? And it was square the nodes. And when anything is square the nodes, we know that we're at a point of choice. Okay, we're at a evolutionary crossroads. The resolution for that new moon square the nodes of the moon and Chiron square the nodes of the moon was going back to the past, the south node in Capricorn, and seeing how we have structured our lives in such a way that has sort of taken the soul and the feeling out of our life. And the North Node in Cancer is about connecting with our feelings, connecting with our family, connecting with our clan, connecting with that we need for survival. And so this is kind of a reset. That new moon in Aries is kind of a reset as to what is really important. What do we really need in our lives? Okay, and so we're being tested. And now as April starts and most places are in some sort of lockdown, we have this crisis. We have this crisis aspect, and it is a crisis in action. And so we feel the need to take an action, and that action is an action that helps us to survive and then ultimately thrive. First quarter squares uh, have to do with fear of the future. Okay. And instead of being caught up in the fear, what we need to do is we start to need to build foundations for a new way of relating to life, a new way of relating to life. And that's the best way to express this energy at this time. So the next thing that happens is on the 3rd of April. Let me see here. Just give me one second. I have some notes here, and I just want to look at the notes um, as I'm going through this with you. So I'm sorry about. Here we go. All right. And so we have this first quarter square, okay, and we also have two days later on the 3rd we have the planet Venus ingressing or moving into Gemini. What's important about this is that Venus is actually going to be in Gemini from April 3rd to June 24th, a full 82 days. Now, generally, Venus spends about 30 days in a sign. The reason for the fact that it's spending almost 3 times that amount of time in the sign is because Venus is having a retrograde period. Venus will be retrograde from May 13th to June 24th. For 42 days, it's retrograde. Okay, 42 days, it's retrograde. Actually, Venus is in Gemini for longer than that. I'm sorry, longer than that. Venus retrograde in Gemini is a review of our relationships and how we communicate within those relationships. But we're not in retrograde. Venus is moving forward in Gemini. So it's really important to keep the lines of communication open with the people that you care about. It will help us. Isolation isn't going to help us. So, some of us are isolated. We'll call it isolated with our families. Other people are alone. If you know people who are alone, make sure you are somebody is talking to them. Make sure that they have an ability to communicate. It's going to be very important for their mental and physical health. Okay. So we have Venus moving into Gemini, where it's going to be for quite a long time. All right, and we also have on this day Mercury making a conjunction to Neptune. This occurs at 20 degrees of Pisces, and I have the chart here. In the chart for the United States, I don't know if you can see this, so hold on one second. Let me see if I can have you see this. Just one moment. Okay, it's right here. Okay, so we have this is Mercury conjunct Neptune at 20 degrees. 20 degrees of Pisces, Sabian symbol, a table set for an evening meal. Okay, an indication that in the end and at the appointed time, the individual's needs will be met among those who he is linked to by spiritual and or biological a biological web of energy. And so this means that our needs will be met if we can connect with those people who we are biologically and or spiritually connected to. So it's important for us to stay connected, and that's also what Venus in Gemini is requiring us to do. The key word here is nourishment. So we need to be nourished spiritually and physically. Okay. This particular conjunction, this is a chart for the United States of America. It is erected to um, Washington, D.C. This conjunction of Mercury and Neptune occurs in the fifth house of creativity. We're actually going to see a lot of these conjunctions and these important points throughout this month in the United States, okay, for the United States. And you could do this with everybody's, you know, wherever you live, you can do this. You just have to put it to either the state where you live or the place where you live. You'll see how it affects you personally. I happen to live on the East Coast, and Washington, D.C. And Massachusetts are not that different, so it's not going to be that different for me. But if you live on another coast or if you live in another country, it could be different in what house it falls in. So the energy of the conjunction is the same. It is Mercury, which is the planet of the mind, and Neptune, which is the planet of spirit, coming together. So it's seeding of our mind by spirit, and how it's going to express itself will depend on, to a certain extent, where you are. It also depends on your personal chart. For me, this conjunction actually happens on my own personal moon, and it happens in my eighth house. So it's going to be a little different for me. It's going to be about sharing. It's very deeply emotional, deeply personal, a deeply personal experience with this. And the moon is the mother, and I live at home with my mother, who's almost 100 years old. So with Neptune and Mercury there, I have to be very aware of how I communicate with her, and it's not always easy because she's partly deaf, and even when she hears me, she pretends she doesn't. So that's that's me. It's not you. All right. So um, but in the United States, in the fifth house, opportunity to connect with our children, opportunity to connect with our creativity. Okay. All right. So we have that. Um, and then on April 4th, we also have a very important conjunction, and that is a conjunction between Pluto and uh, Jupiter. The Pluto Jupiter conjunction, okay, is occurring at 25 degrees of Capricorn. In this chart for the United States, it's occurring in the second house of resources and money. Okay, resources and money. Um, Pluto is the planet of death and rebirth, and Jupiter is the planet of expansion. This is probably going to be a time of where a lot of people pass on because of this virus in America, especially in the hot spots now. So we can expect there to be sort of a surge of that. Um, it is also an opportunity to expand our understanding. Um, and it's in Capricorn. And so it has to do with the powers that be, the transformation of them, or perhaps the need for transformation. It's a real test of the government, um, but it's also an opportunity for us to expand our understanding of either how empowered or disempowered we are and what we need to do to work with that energy. Um, Pluto is confronting things that are greater than us, and we are confronting a great um, something that definitely could take us out if it wanted to, or if it's our time to be taken out by it, certainly. Um, but it's also an opportunity to reestablish your beliefs, reestablish your relationship to all of this, and reinvent yourself. This is an opportunity to reinvent yourself um, at this time. And there's actually three conjunctions of um, Pluto to Jupiter. This is an opportunity. This is a 13-year cycle. Every 13 years, Pluto and Jupiter come together. And last time it happened in December of 2007, and it was in Sagittarius. We did not have all this death, perhaps, but we didn't have a Saturn in the mix, because Saturn has been sort of moving with Pluto and and Pluto and Jupiter. And of course, we had the Pluto Saturn conjunction at 23 degrees, and this is just sort of 2 degrees away. The next two conjunctions of Pluto and Jupiter are going to be at that 23-degree mark. There's a lot of things happening in that 23-degree mark of Capricorn. So you have to look in your chart where you have Capricorn, especially around those degrees 22, 23, 24, 25 degrees of Capricorn. Okay. All right. So 25 degrees of Capricorn, the Sabian symbol is a store filled with precious oriental rugs. It's the use of cultural and artistic process as a means of enhancing personal comfort and appreciation. And it is called reliance on tradition. Reliance on tradition. So there are some traditional things that we can count on, but not all of it. Not all of it. We are reinventing ourselves. We also have a lovely trine between Venus newly in Gemini and Saturn newly in Capricorn, in Aquarius. This is a trine of creative self-expression, and so we have another energy here associated with our ability to create, and the creation has to do with our ability to communicate, um, and inform and help each other understand what it means to be human, quite frankly. Okay, let's see now. All right, so we also have a big day on the 7th of April, and there's a couple of things happening on the 7th. And let me just look at my notes here. Okay. So on the 7th, we have like 4 things happening, big things. The first big thing that's happening is Mars is making a square to Uranus. Okay. And this square that it's making, of course, squares always create crisis. Mars is energy, Uranus is explosions. So this can be a very difficult, challenging time. You have to be very careful with this energy. When you're dealing with Uranus, you can't really contain it. It's an uncontainable energy. And Mars is things can get out of hand. So we do have to be very aware. This could be another one of those peak sort of moments. It seems that April is going to be a big peak for activity. This is a last quarter crisis in consciousness square. It occurs at 6 degrees of Aquarius, Taurus, Mars in Aquarius, Uranus in Taurus. The other thing that's significant is that Uranus and Aquarius, uh, Uranus is the ruling planet of Aquarius. So there's an energy of Mars here, but it's really very Aquarian. And with Taurus there, we're dealing with life. We're dealing with life. This is a crisis in consciousness or belief square. This was actually seated back, and seated meaning the initial conjunction, back in 2019, February 13th, when these two planets came together at the last degree of Aries. This is kind of the last gasp of Uranus and Aries energy, and it's expressing itself now. Okay. Um, this energy, it's really hard to actually say what this is gonna do, except that it's a revolutionary energy, and that it really is about becoming an authority in your own life. And it really is about working toward the common good. Ultimately, that's the other side of this square. And so we will see how well those in power are dealing with the situation at hand. And perhaps there's a revolution in the air for that. Okay, so the other thing that's happening is that um, we have a full moon on that day. Okay, we have a full moon. And it's a full moon in Libra. And we have it here. We have the moon at 1843 of Libra, so 19 degrees of Libra. And we have the sun at 19 degrees of Aries. Now, this chart is for the United States of America, okay? And we have the axis of the full moon here is between the 11th house and the 5th house. The axis of the 11th and the 5th house is the axis of love. 5th house is personal love. 11th house is impersonal love. Okay, it's the Leo Aquarius energy. All right. And so, although we're dealing with the moon in Libra relationship and the sun in Aries, the I am principle, it is about that. It's about identity and relating to the other, but it's also about love, okay, and creativity and being responsible, being our brother's keeper. You know, this whole stay-at-home order is part of being a brother's keeper, okay. So we have here 19 degrees of Aries, which is where the sun is. It says a magic carpet. It says the use of creative imagination. The key word, a strife transcending an unattached look upon everyday reality. Okay, so we have to transcend the strife that we find ourselves in to look at uh, our situation from a more unattached or detached place, right? That's the sun. In the moon, we have a gang of robbers in hiding. It's protest against disharmonic social privilege. This is the 1%, 99% people. New full moons are always points of awareness, and we are going to become very aware of that, of how the difference in how people are treated depending on their financial situation. Okay, this is all square the Pluto Jupiter conjunction from the second house value, right? We are all of the same value, but unfortunately, people aren't treated that way. And this is going to be an eyeful for people, I think. Okay. We also have on that day two sextiles. We have Mercury sextiling Pluto, and we have Mercury sextiling Jupiter. Jupiter and Pluto are very close to each other. So as Mercury sextiles one, it sextiles the other. This is to open the lines of communication. Mercury sextiled Pluto, opening the lines of communication to the soul. Mercury sextile Jupiter, an ability to uh, understand one another, okay, to come to a place of understanding, to gather the information that we need so that we can understand one another. I have here the lines of communication are open to new ideas on how to help the collective and to create networks for the common good. Okay, all right, let's see here. All right, on the 8th of April, which is a Wednesday, we have Chiron making a supportive sextile to Mars. Sextiles are mentally stimulating. This particular combination is an Aquarius energy, and so this is about taking action to heal one another. Okay, it's progressive action. It's action to to help all people heal. So that energy is there and available to us. And I don't want to necessarily get political at this time, but I think it does point out the need for something like a Medicare for all, where we have health care that is taken care of, and that we don't have. It doesn't depend on your job. It doesn't depend on how much money you make. It doesn't depend on any of that. It just depends that you are breathing and sentient, and you deserve care. Okay. And I think that's one of the things that this pandemic is going to show us. On the 11th, Mercury moves into Aries. This feels good because Mercury's been in Pisces since I think um, the 4th of February. It went into Aquarius for a little while, but not very long during its retrograde cycle. But it's been in Pisces for a long time, and Pisces makes things. Pisces can confuse things, right? And so when it goes into Aries, our mind starts to clear a little bit, and we start to see things more clearly. And we also tend to think in more um, sort of progressive new ideas, and we're more open to that. Sort of fighting the good fight with our minds here. We also have on the 11th a sextile to Saturn of Mercury that is opening the lines of communication, new ideas, progressive thought. I feel like this is a period, the 8th through the 11th, where perhaps things start to clear up and we start to sort of work together to make solutions. Perhaps the giant wave that just hit us, we're starting to sort of come out of that. Okay, but there are other things going on, other waves happening. Okay, so on the 14th of April, we have two squares. Um, we have a first quarter square between the Sun and Pluto, and we have a last quarter square between the Sun and the Moon. Let's talk about the Sun and the Moon first. This is the next crisis that we have. We had the new moon on the 24th of March, planting the seeds. We had the first quarter square on the 1st of April, taking action to survive. Then we had the full moon, which is the halfway point, where we become aware of things, right? Aries and Libra, and now we have this last quarter moon. And the last quarter moon is the Sun in Aquarius, in Aries, and the Moon in Capricorn. And the Moon is sandwiched between Pluto and Jupiter. The Moon in a chart is the people, and we're right in the middle of the Lord of Death and the God of Thunder. so. Um, so we're right in the middle of it. We're right in the middle of the power struggle, and it's our opportunity to sort of wake up to that and to start taking the power back for ourselves. Okay, and there are power in numbers, folks. There's way more of us than there are of them. And if we insist upon it, things will change, and we have to keep that in mind. That's why it's important not to get too caught up in the fear of things, but see how it is for those of us who don't have to have it as necessarily a completely personal experience is especially important for us. People who are in the crisis of the disease, people who have it, or have loved ones who have it, or people are passing because of it, or they're working in hospitals, nurses and doctors and such, they're in the moment. They're dealing with the crisis, like the front line, right? But the rest of us sitting here in our homes trying to stay safe and sane, it's important for us to have the right sort of spiritual and mental and emotional perspective on this. And as this is happening, figure out how we're going to prevent it from happening again, and figure out how we're going to prevent those people in power from doing power grabs, because that's also happening. There's a lot of power grabs happening right now. And so we need to stay aware of that, stay open. Now, there may not be a whole lot we can do about it except to be aware that it's happening. So keep your eyes and your ears open, folks, because they will use fear to scare us, to take our power away. And we can't let them do that. Okay. Let's talk about the square between the sun and Pluto, the first quarter square. Now, back in January, we had a whole pileup of Capricorn planets. We had the South Node, we had Jupiter, we had Saturn, we had Pluto, and the South Node. Did I mention the South Node? And the Sun and Mercury, all in Capricorn. And they all made conjunctions to each other at that time, seeding something. It was the seeding time. And when you're dealing with Capricorn and all these issues, we're dealing with power. Okay, we're dealing with power and structure and the structure of power and a sense of power or powerlessness. So things were being seeded at that time. And remember, we had the Pluto Saturn conjunction right in the middle of it all. Okay. And so a new way of structuring power, right? 30 plus year cycle. Last time that happened was 1982. Right. And so this was a very potent time. This also happened in the middle of an eclipse season. I don't know if you remember that. I want to point out that 2020 is like 3 months old. I should have said that right in the beginning. Now we're at the 1st of April and we're going into the 4th month. It seems to be like the most intense time period that's either super, super long or super, super short, depending on, your perspective or the day, right? So we have to take that into consideration as well. Okay, so we have this first quarter square of the sun to Pluto. And what's going to happen is the sun is going to make that first quarter square to Pluto. It's going to make a first quarter square to Jupiter. So it's going to go through all of those Capricorn planets. First quarter squares are crisis in action, right? We want to take an action, and the sun illuminates the actions that we can take. And it's a building, right? It's the building energy, building foundations for a new way of living, a new way of being, a new way of relating to power, our own power and the power that is over us as far as the government. So we're going to start to see people taking action here. And it depends on what kind of action we can take, depending on whether we're allowed out of the house or not. And so you have to figure out how to organize and build your life in such a way that you can reclaim the power of your life. And that may take a lot of sacrifice, because when you are dependent on sort of the man for your bread, if the man doesn't want to share, you're up, where you're up without a paddle, right? So you have to figure out, how can I reorganize my life in such a way that I am not at the mercy of this? I'm not at the mercy of this. All right. On the 15th of April, right? The next day we have the sun square Jupiter, right? I just talked about this. This is similar, okay? Another crisis in action square. On the 18th, we have two sextiles. We have a sextile, and they're both with Mercury. One is to Venus and one is to Mars. Okay. The Venus sextile, let's see. Both of these sextiles are Venus to, okay, I don't want to get too technical. Both of these sextiles open the lines of communication and make us aware of the need for progressive change. Okay. And it's Venus and Mars, so it deals with our relationships, okay, our relationships to one another. A realization that perhaps no matter what we think and who's what and who's right and who's wrong, that if we want things to change, we have to work together to change them. Okay. Things aren't going to happen from the top down. Things have to happen from the bottom up. And we're at the bottom, folks, and it's time to work together to change things at the top. Okay. All right. On the 19th of April, the sun goes into Taurus. The sun in Taurus, things will start to calm down, will become more practically oriented. This is a time to tend your garden. This is a time, a lot of the energy and the disruption of Aries is now moving into that Taurus energy. Now that would normally be very calming and very stabilizing, but we have to remember that Uranus is in Taurus, and so eventually the sun is going to make its conjunction to Uranus. But before that happens, we have a bunch of stuff that's very, very significant. Okay, first thing, Sun at 2 degrees of Taurus makes a square to Saturn at 2 degrees of Aquarius. This is a crisis in action square, okay? Saturn in Aquarius is how do we structure our lives so that we can work within the group, right? The group of humanity, right? And the sun the sun in Taurus illuminates resources. So this is going to be how do we work with the resources that we have, okay? Um, on April 22nd, we have a new moon in the sign of Taurus. It's at 4 degrees of Taurus. Sabian symbol for the 4 degrees of Taurus is a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. Okay, so now we're in a new lunation cycle. The lunation cycle of the new moon in Aries has completed, and now we're moving into Taurus. Taurus is about stability. It's about resources. It's about resourcefulness. It's about money. It's about our relationship to ourselves. How do we feel about ourselves? Okay. It's about tending your garden. Okay. It's about creating root structures so that whatever seeds you planted in Aries can grow. And so it's kind of a time of really sort of drawing yourself in to see and marshaling your forces and seeing what kind of resourcefulness that you have with this energy. Um, the new moon is conjunct Uranus. It is square Saturn. It is a first quarter square, so it's the crisis in action. And so this is about rebuilding the world on the basis Saturn and Aquarius that we are all one and that we are all equal. Okay, so this is about equality. We have a trine to the south node of the moon and a sextile to the north node of the moon. So there's flow between the past and the future with this new moon, and so we can access the past and the beneficial things. You know, I keep talking about letting go of all this structure and things that no longer serve, but not everything goes. There are still some structures that are viable and valuable, and we can utilize them at this time to help us survive and move through it, move forward, and then ultimately survive with this. And then the sextile to the North Node in Cancer opens the lines of communication to our feelings and other people's feelings. So this is a time when we can really work together. Don't let the powers that be separate you, folks. We are all in this together. Okay, keep that in mind. All right. On April 25th, we have a first quarter square between Mercury and Pluto. Remember, I said all those planets that were together in Capricorn in January are making their first quarter squares to the slower moving planets, Jupiter and Pluto in this case. And this is a crisis in action that has to do with our mind. So this is building with our mind, so to speak. And on the same day, we have Pluto going retrograde. And whenever Pluto goes retrograde, usually there's some outward expression. It can be seismic, it can be many things. But Pluto in Capricorn is the 1%. And now that, the 1% of the 1%, it's the billionaires, folks. And now that it's moving retrograde, they will have less influence here. And there's more room for the people at this time. Okay. On the 26th, we have Mercury squaring Jupiter. Remember, first it squares Pluto, then it squares Jupiter. Another crisis in action square, using our mind to build foundational structures. On the same day, we have the Sun make a conjunction to Uranus. This is the start of the Sun-Uranus synodic cycle. It's illumination, it's revolution, it's breaking free, it's progressive thinking. Okay, so this is very, very powerful. It occurs at 7 degrees of Taurus. The Sabian symbol is a woman of Samaria. at the ancestral well. It's the meeting of the traditional past and the creative spirit, uh, pointing to the future. So it's a balance between the past and the future, which is really um, what was it? The new moon in Taurus was talking about that as well, with its connections to the south node and the north node. So there are things from the past that will still be viable for us to utilize, but we also have to look forward in a new way and a new direction. On the 20th, and this new moon in the chart of the United States falls in the second house of values, the second house of values. So that should be very interesting. Um, yeah. Very interesting. And it's in conjunct the asteroid Juno. Juno is in Libra. Juno is how we relate to one another. So it's going to take some adjustments when it comes to how we relate to one another to really sort of work this energy. But this is a revolutionary energy. We could also see some seismic stuff, weather events and such with this energy. On the 27th, which is the next day, Mercury moves into Taurus, so our mind starts to settle down into Taurus. On the 28th, the next day, we have a square um, between Mercury and Saturn. Remember, Saturn is in Aquarius now. Mercury moves into Taurus. Taurus and Aquarius are both fixed signs. We have that first quarter square again. 2 degrees of, I want to just read this to you because this is very interesting. If I can find it here. Hold on one second. What day is this? Okay, sorry guys. I just have to like look ahead in my notes here. Yes, here we go. So this 2 degrees of, goodness gracious, I apologize for this. Okay, anyway. So 2 degrees of Taurus and 2 degrees of Aquarius. There was something else that happened with those degrees. Let me just, I know I should remember, but this is a lot of information to keep in your head. The Sun and Saturn also were at 2 degrees of Taurus and Aquarius. And I just want to read to you the Sabian symbols for 2 degrees of Taurus and 2 degrees of Aquarius. And let me just find that here. Okay, so this is the square. This is the first quarter square. And in this case, we're talking about Mercury and Saturn. But a few days before, it was the Sun and Saturn. And this has to do with building the foundations and the structures for a more fair future, right? Saturn in Aquarius. So 2 degrees of Taurus, the Sabian symbol. So this is where the Sun is, or Mercury, depending on which day we're looking at. And it says an electrical storm. The cosmic power able to transform all the implications of natural existence. 2 degrees of Aquarius, Sabian symbol, an unexpected thunderstorm. The need to develop inner security, which will enable us to meet unexpected crises. Okay, so in these two symbols, we have both an electrical storm and a thunderstorm. So we can expect perhaps some weather at this time. And if it's not weather out in the world, it's certainly going to be weather in the way we relate to one another. And so we need to take into consideration that on some level, this is going to be the new normal for us. And we have to sort of build into our lives these safety valves and these structures, because we might come to realize that the government is not really structured to the safety nets have a lot of holes in them. And that's been a process that they have been doing for years, probably since Pluto and Neptune. Between Pluto and Saturn made their conjunction back in 82. That's when they started to sort of, fray the, it had to do with the with union busting, and then starting to gradually take more and more away from the people who were depending on that to help them survive. And now it's very, very stark and and we don't even have health care in this, at least in this country. So these are things that we're going to see where all the holes are. And it's going to be us, the people, to make the choices to fix it. And we're going to have to become self reliant. So we're really sort of starting a whole new way of being, and in a way, a more interconnected way of being, where the people at the top have less to say about what we do. But chances are they're not going to let us want to get away with that. So that's why it's really important to make sure that they're not doing stuff under the covers and under the, with all this fear that is out there, that you don't lose sight of what's really happening. So that's very, very important at this time. Okay, on April 30th, we have Mercury make a conjunction to Uranus. This is also occurs at 7 degrees of Taurus. This is about a new quality of being. It's about the past and future together to move forward into the future. Mercury is the planet of the lower mind, and Uranus is the planet of the higher mind. This is the start of a cycle where the higher mind is seeding the lower mind. And so it's the start of a new synodic cycle between Mercury, the lower mind, and Uranus, the higher mind. So there is help out there. There is help. We can help one another. There's help from spirit. There's help from our higher self. We need to stay connected to one another. We need to stay connected to our spiritual core. This is the balance that we talk about at the very beginning of this talk, where it's the balance of the spiritual and the material, the lambda, the back and forth, right? The infinity, the 8 vibration. As you sow, so shall you reap. So well, so well. Master what you need to master. Build what you need to build. Have every crisis be an opportunity to build a firmer foundation and a more loving and holistic life and a way of living, because we are in charge, folks, whether they say we're in charge or not. We're not lemmings, okay? We are interconnected spiritual, physical beings. And the thing that will connects us, and the most powerful force that connects us, is the power of love. Remember, the 8 vibration is connected to Leo. And a lot of the conjunctions that happen, at least in the United States, are happening in the 5th house of love. But just generally, love is the way forward. We have a choice between love and fear. Choose love. Choose love. Thank you so much. I know this was very long and a lot to take in. I hope you find it helpful. You certainly have time, right, to listen and re-listen. I love you guys. If you would like a reading with me, I do have openings. Um, give yourself the gift of that. I am also going to start beginner Kabbalah, um, and beginner numerology. Just keep your eyes peeled. I'll make announcements. I'll tell you when exactly that's going to happen and how I'm going to have to set it up for you guys. So take care and love to all of you. Bye.